Hey everybody, this is Gabe Hernandez with Comical Opinions, talking about the opinion of the day, which is the title of this video, which is why Boom and Dynamite right now I think are doing a better job than Marvel and DC for one very specific reason, which I'll get to in a second. Before we get started, please, if you haven't already, go to my newsletter, Comical Opinions. The link is down in the description, and sign up. It's completely free. And on a weekly basis, I'll put out a more lengthy article of one of the more interesting topics from the course of the week and do a deep dive into some specifics about that article, maybe give you a little bit more food for thought. And basically, it's an expanded version of one of these videos. It's completely free. Just go to the link, put your email in, and you'll be notified as soon as the next newsletter comes out. And the idea is to do that once a month. Once a week, not once a month, once a week. And you'll see items like this, converting comics to film, why that works, why that doesn't, comics canon, why that is important, and in some cases why it's not, and on and on and on we go. I think you'll enjoy it. It's completely free. Please do that before you do anything else. And let's get into the topic today. So ICV2 put out this article today saying Boom and Dynamite have extended returnability in the face of the COVID-19 lockdown. What they're doing is they've extended the returnable programs for comic stores, helping to cut risks as retailers continue to battle the challenges of selling comics during the COVID pandemic. The key word in that statement is risk. That's the big deal. So in the early days of the lockdown, late into February, early into March, when Dynamite had announced they would shut down, when states were locking down all over the place, one of the big, there was a lot of discussion going back and forth saying, well, when things come back online, what do publishers need to do differently with the local comic book stores to kind of improve the market, because it took a huge hit and basically shut down with very little prodding. The comics industry distribution model, I'm talking about floppies, like monthly comics, not everything under comics, but the monthly stuff, the stuff you would get from Marvel and DC, basically collapsed with just a little bit of a nudge. It's extremely brittle, still is. There hasn't been a lot of change there. They're sort of slowly coming back online, but it hasn't changed that much. One of the things that is one of those words that came up in a lot of those early discussions, especially with the comics retailers and Steve Jeppy from Dynamite and everybody else, is this notion of returnability. And I am a huge proponent of returnability. And when I see an article like this that says Boom and Dynamite are extending returnability, they get the big old attaboy from me on that one. But Marvel and DC, not so much. DC, I think, did a little bit of returnability for a very short period of time. Image as well. But basically, when those timers ran out, it was right back to business as usual. And I want to dive in a little bit into my opinion as to why returnability is so important, why the notion that the publishers aren't doing it is not only hurting themselves, but it's also hurting the local comic shops, and it's basically dragging the industry down. Well, more than one factor is dragging the industry down, but the lack of returnability is a key piece that just doesn't get enough of a deep dive thought into why that's the case. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So let's just, first of all, what's the definition of returnability? It's the quality or state of being returnable. In other words, it's the ability for a local comic book shop, when they get a comic from Marvel or DC or anybody else, is their ability to return it when it hasn't sold. There are a number of different reasons why it doesn't sell, but more often than not, the number one reason why a comic doesn't sell is because nobody who is in the vicinity of that local comic book shop is interested in buying it. It just is not appealing to them for whatever reason. It could be the characters, it could be the content, it could be the storyline, but for whatever reason, the quality of that product does not appeal to people enough that they want to buy it. And so we need to talk about the flow a little bit of how does that happen. When a publisher makes a comic, what they do is they send out, or when they're getting ready to release a comic, I should say, to the local comic book stores. It doesn't happen overnight. They don't just ship a bunch of comics in for different characters all to a local comic book store. They put on the shelf, and whatever sells, and whatever doesn't. Is the comic book publishers will put out what's called a solicitation. Some of you know it. If you're familiar with the comic industry, great, you know this. If you don't, they put out what's called a solicitation. Here's an example of a solicitation from DC Comics for a Swamp Thing one shot that's due out, looks like in January. What it is you get a piece of cover art that kind of gives you a sort of a flavor for the visual style of the book. And then you get a little bit about the creative team, who's writing it, who's drawing it, and maybe 3 or 4 sentences about the nature of the story. This particular solicitation is actually kind of generous. I've seen a lot of solicitations where you don't get much more than a sentence or two about the story. And when a comic book shop thinks, hey, that looks interesting, I can sell that, they have to respond and submit their orders for the solicitation, sometimes months in advance. But this is all they have to go on. They don't have any other information other than the cover looks good. And we all know that at this point, sometimes the cover artist is a completely different artist than the person who draws the book, or what you see inside the book is a completely different style or tells a completely different visual story than the cover that you see. That happens a lot these days. They don't know if the story is any good. They don't know anything about it other than essentially a little bit better than a movie poster. That's all they have to go on. They have no information other than to tell you whether or not this is going to be a good book, enough that people buy it. So what do they have to do? They take a chance. They have to know their customer base enough to kind of guess whether or not some of their regular customers would be interested in it. And it's a gamble. They order what they think they can sell, and whatever they can't sell, they either have to kind of try and do an aftermarket deal like on eBay or something like that, or maybe do an exchange with another comic book store that thinks that they can sell it. And it just turns into a big drag. It's a lot of pressure on the comic book stores. It's basically a gamble and a guessing game, and it's just bad all the way around. And when they get a book and it turns out to not be a good book, they're just stuck with it, and they have to kind of fight and finagle to find some way to make their money back, if they can even do that. And so the only thing they have to go on, even though it's a calculated gamble, it's still a gamble, is the only thing they have to go on is the synopsis, the cover art, and maybe a trust and level of confidence in the creative team. Now, for this particular book, the writer is Tom King. I'm not going to say too much about Tom King. If you know anything about Tom King's work, you know that it's not a guarantee that it's going to be a great book. So again, you're going to have to take your chances there. And so what are your options? Your options are take a gamble, buy it, and just hope for the best. That puts all the pressure and all the risk on the local comic book shops. And as we know now, especially through all the trials and tribulations of the COVID lockdown, that a lot of comic book shops are just running on razor-thin margins. Very difficult to take gambles and risks when you're barely making ends meet on a month basis due to the quality of the product. So you say, well, wait a minute, Gabe. Doesn't that apply for everybody? Isn't every business basically taking a gamble when they're trying to sell a product? Nobody can ever guarantee that a sale can be made. Isn't that just part of the business? The answer is no. The answer is no. In publishing in particular, when it comes to magazines, catalogs, and what have you, they've figured out how to deal with that, or at least find some way to hedge their bets on that for a very long time. Let me introduce you to something that's called a data card, if you've never seen one. I used to work for a magazine company for a number of years and also been associated with publishing in various forms and flavors for a very long time. They all have or have access to something that's called a data card. You see it up on the screen there. A data card, and data cards have been in use for almost a century at this point. These are not new. They've been around for a very, very long time. A data card is when you fill out that little card that falls out of a magazine to sign up for a subscription, or when you fill out an application for a credit card, or you do all these kinds of things where you sign up for stuff, or you answer a survey, or somebody calls you on the phone for survey information. That data is all being collected, and they're collected by data analytics companies, market research companies, marketing, data scientists, and what they do is they compile that information into these things that you see in front of you is called the data card. Now, this particular data card, it's just a sample, is for people who work in the construction industry. So if I wanted to start up a magazine that focused on information that would be interesting to people who are related somehow to the construction industry, I go out and I purchase a data card for that type of people segment. What they do is the data card will have information about who these people are, what's their educational background, what are the things they like, what they don't like, demographic information that break down by sex, age, gender, race, what states they live in, what types of marketing and publishing and purchasing habits they have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is one very specific type of card, but they have data cards for all kinds of magazine types, for all kinds of people groups. Again, this has been in use for almost a century at this point. Marvel and DC have these. And the reason I bring that up is because what should be happening is, and you say what should be happening is when a publisher and an editor bring in a creative team and they want to create a book for a particular character, what they should be doing is looking at these data cards for the people who might be interested in that type of character and make sure that the elements of that book appeal to that demographic to increase the probability that book is going to be purchased. And you say, well, wait a minute, how would Marvel or DC have that information? They have that information because, especially, for example, if you look over here at Marvel, you can subscribe to their comic books. They are capturing this information when people subscribe. They see the trends. They see the information. They know who is buying what types of comic books, at least through their subscription model. Now, if somebody walks in off the street over in the local comic shop and just picks something off a shelf, they're not going to have that. But from the subscription information, they definitely are capturing that. So let's take an example here. Here's Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom is a universal Marvel villain, but more often than not, he's associated with the Fantastic Four as a main villain. If I was coming along and saying, okay, we're going to put together a new Fantastic Four run, I would say, okay, well, who are the types of people that typically will subscribe to Doctor Doom? Give me that data card information. Let's see who they are, what states they're in, what are the type of hobbies and interests they have, what are the things that they like and they don't like. And so when we're putting that book together and with the creative team, let's make sure that there are elements and there are tones and there are themes in that comic that relate to the demographics of the people who also subscribe currently to Doctor Doom, because chances are they're going to like very similar things because it's a related character. You say, ooh, that's a lot of work. Yeah, it is a lot of work, but that's the kind of thing that needs to be happening to increase the probability that books that are sold to comic book stores are going to sell. They're not going to be stuck with those things. So if we talk about returnability, now that's more than the marketing track, but let's bring that back to returnability and why that makes a difference and why that matters. So if I have this Swamp Thing book and I've drawn, written, created, and pitched it in such a way that I know is going to somewhat match the people who are traditionally fans of Swamp Thing, the probability that that book is going to sell is going to be pretty high. And I don't have to leave it up to the comic book stores in a crapshoot, a calculated guess to figure out whether or not they think it's going to buy. I have some level of confidence that it will buy. Now, when they don't do that, again, it's a crapshoot. They're stuck with it, which is not a good thing. And when comic book stores are on razor thin margins, that's not going to help them out at all. And it's going to put them in the position that they're in exactly right now. Now, again, the publishers have this demographic information from the comics that people are subscribing to. It's the publisher's responsibility to make sure that the product they're putting out matches what people buy, what the typical types of subscribers will be. For example, Ultraman, that's a very specific type of market. Folks who like Iron Man. I mean, there are all kinds of cross matching here with people who subscribe to these things when they're creating new books. Look, you've got Darth Vader bounty hunters. People who like Star Wars should be eating this stuff up. What they should be looking at is people who subscribe to these Star Wars magazines, and when they are comics, when they create a new one, it should have a lot of elements that people who consistently subscribe to these things will like. Now, why is that good? If they take that approach, because they're certainly not taking it now. Why? Because number one, it takes the pressure off the comic book stores, because they just can't afford it. It's just not fair. It's not right. They just can't afford it. Also, when you have returnability in place, when those books come back to you, so let's say I do that Fantastic Four run and it just didn't hit the mark, I get a returnability rate of say 20%. So I'm returning book after book, one out of every 5 people saying, the story stinks. When you have returnability, the editors and the publishers can take that information back and say, okay, why did this miss the mark? why didn't it land the way it was supposed to, they can use that information to improve their data so that the next time a Fantastic Four run comes out, they have more information to understand what they missed or what they put in that people didn't like, and they can leave that out better. What that does is it creates a cycle of continuous improvement. The books should, over time, get better and better and better and better. And when that happens, the comic book stores have a better and better and better chance of selling every comic that comes in. When they sell every comic that comes in, their profit margins go up. When their profit margins go up, the comic book stores make money, they stay around longer, they grow, they thrive, they survive. All this should be happening. It should be happening already. And you say, well, isn't it happening now? No, it's not. I'm gonna go back to the Hollywood Reporter article, the interview with Jim Lee. What is he saying? 20 to 25% of the books aren't breaking even or losing money, which means they are definitely either have the data and they're not using it, or they don't know how to get it from whatever sources they can. The publishers are not doing their job. So we say, when the books come in and they're terrible and they're not selling, the first thing people want to do is they want to blame the writer. They want to blame the artist. They want to blame the colorist or the letterist or whoever else. Now, the people you should be blaming, if you need to blame anybody, but if you need to blame somebody, the people you should be blaming are the publishers and the editors, because they approve the books before they go to print, which means they should be looking at this data that is comics related, saying, does this book kind of hit the mark with that type of person? And if the answer is no, it should not be going to print, because what you're doing is you're putting about a book that the people that you're targeting are not going to want. If they're not going to want it, they're not going to buy it. Not going to buy it, that means the comic book stores are going to get stuck with junk, and you're forcing them into failure. That's not good for anybody. It's on the publisher and the editor to look at this data card data to make sure that the books that they're publishing match whatever titles they're doing, to make sure that the book is going to be a success for everybody involved, including the comic book stores. The only way they can do that is twofold. They have to be looking at this data to make sure that the book matches. And two, they have to have returnability, because you need that continuous feedback. Because if they put out a book and it doesn't land, if there's no returnability, you don't know why. You don't know why that book didn't sell. You don't know why it didn't resonate with your customers. And if you don't know why it doesn't resonate with your customers, you can't improve. You can't do better. You need returnability to make the cycle repeat itself, to make the cycle continuously improve everything that's going on. Now, all that sounds very clinical and very business-like. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Doesn't that kind of stifle the creative freedom of the artists and the writers and everybody else that's going on? I mean, doesn't that kind of pin them down to not being able to express themselves creatively? The answer to a certain degree is yes. But here's why. Because you're not an artiste. When you're working for a publisher, you are not an artiste. You are a commercial artist. I'm speaking to the artists and the writers out there. You are not an artiste. You are not a Picasso. You are not the next Van Gogh. You are a commercial artist. You're taking art and making it a commercial product. It is your job to make art that sells. And if you're not doing that, then you're doing something wrong. If you feel like you need to do that, that's fine. That's why there's Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Start your own indie project so it can be all about you and your creative vision. And then people can like it or not, or they can fund it or not, and they can buy it or not. But when you're working for a publisher that needs to make profit to survive, and DC, I'm looking at you right now because you just had some massive layoffs because you're not profitable. That means you're not making art that sells, which means you're not paying attention to your customers. You're not looking at the data, and you're not making a book that will resonate with your customers. And the only way you're going to do that is you have to do two things. You have to look at the data for the type of people that are buying your books, and you have to have returnability to get that continuous feedback, to make adjustments when you need to. Anyway, so that's me pounding on returnability and why it's so important. But publishing is a business. Just like any other business, it needs to make money. People who are kind of loosey-goosey, woo-woo, this is art, and don't infringe on my art. If that's what you want to do, go be an artist, go be the starving artist. But a business needs to make money. People's livelihoods are depending on it. And to think otherwise is a grave miscalculation. So that's my comical opinion for the day on returnability and why I think Boom and Dynamite are doing the right thing. Marvel and DC and Image too, I believe, need to step up because you're taking your customers for granted again, and that's just not going to bode well for you in the future. But before I go, remember, please subscribe to my newsletter, Comical Opinions. The link is down in the description. Let me know what you think about this video too. Did you hate it? Am I off track? Was it completely boring? Give me a thumbs up. Give me a thumbs down. Just give me any kind of rating you think is makes sense. And leave a comment. If you hate this, let me know. But tell me why you hate it. Or if you love it, let me know. And tell me why you love it too. Please comment, like, share, subscribe. And this is Gabe Hernandez for Comical Opinions. Thank you very much, and you have a great day.